The stars looked different this far from Earth. Commander Jake stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge and watched the binary suns of the system burn bright against the darkness. He had seen many strange things in his 20 years of space travel, but nothing had prepared him for what waited ahead. "Commander, we're receiving a signal," Lieutenant Amy Parker said from her station. She was young, barely 30, but she had a gift for languages that made her valuable on first contact missions. "They're directing us to coordinates near the planet." "Follow their instructions," Jake said. He kept his voice calm, but his hand rested near the emergency alert button. The Ascendants had ruled this part of the galaxy for 10,000 years. Every species they encountered either bowed to them or disappeared. Humanity was about to find out which fate awaited them. The horizon's edge moved through space toward a massive structure that floated in orbit. It was not a space station in any normal sense. It looked more like a palace made of light and metal, with towers that reached out in impossible directions. Energy rippled across its surface in waves of blue and gold. "They're calling it the Divine Throne," Amy said, reading her instruments. "The translation software is having trouble with their language. They use a lot of words that mean worship, divine, eternal, holy." Jake frowned. "Sounds religious." "Or they think very highly of themselves," Amy replied. A docking beam locked onto their ship and pulled them gently toward an opening in the structure. Jake ordered his crew to prepare for contact. He chose 6 people to accompany him, including Amy and Lieutenant Chris, his head of security. Chris was a big man with steady hands and a cool head. If things went wrong, Jake wanted him close. They walked through corridors that seemed to glow from within. The walls were not metal or any material Jake recognized. When he touched one, it felt warm and alive. Music played from somewhere, deep and resonant, like a cathedral organ mixed with sounds no human instrument could make. Finally, they entered a chamber so vast that Jake could not see the far wall. The ceiling disappeared into shadows high above. In the center of the room, 12 beings sat on thrones that floated in the air without any visible support. The Ascendants looked almost human, but not quite. They were tall and thin, with skin that seemed to shimmer with inner light. Their eyes were large and completely black, like pools of oil. They wore robes that moved as if blown by wind, though the air was perfectly still. Above each head floated a crown made of pure energy that crackled and sparked. The being on the central throne rose. The air around him bent and twisted. When he spoke, his voice filled the chamber like thunder. "I am High Ascendant, Master of 300 worlds, Eternal Guardian of the Light, Divine Ruler of the Domain." He paused, and his black eyes fixed on Jake. "You are the representatives of the species called humanity." "I'm Commander Jake of Earth," Jake said. He did not bow. "We come in peace to establish diplomatic relations." A ripple went through the assembled Ascendants. One of them, a female with a crown of blue energy, leaned forward. "You stand in the presence of the divine," she said. Her voice was sharp as broken glass. "It is customary to kneel." Jake kept his feet planted firmly on the ground. "Humans don't kneel to other people. We believe all beings are equal." The silence that followed was absolute. Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Chris shifted slightly, moving closer to Jake's side. Amy's hand moved to her translation device, as if checking to make sure she had understood correctly. Descended from his throne. He did not walk down steps. He simply floated through the air until he stood face to face with Jake. Up close, Jake could see that the Ascendant was old. Lines crossed his face, and his hands trembled slightly. "Equal," said the word as if tasting something bitter. "You claim to be equal to gods." "We don't believe in gods," Jake said simply. "We believe in people. Some people have more power than others. Some have more knowledge, but power and knowledge don't make you better than anyone else." Raised one hand. Energy gathered around his fingers, building into a sphere of white light that hurt to look at. "Observe," he said. He pointed at a that appeared in the air. It showed a small moon orbiting one of the system's outer planets. Closed his fist. On the screen, the moon exploded. It did not crack or break apart slowly. It simply ceased to exist, replaced by a cloud of dust and debris. That is power, said. The power to create and destroy, the power of the divine. Jake looked at the screen, then back at the Ascendant. That's technology, very impressive technology, but it's not divine, it's just tools. The female Ascendant with the blue crown rose from her throne. I am El, voice of the divine will, you speak heresy. The Ascendants are gods. We have ruled for 10,000 years. We bring order to chaos. We protect the weak. We guide the lost. By forcing them to worship you, Jake asked. By teaching them their place in the universe, El said. Every species we have encountered has seen the truth of our divinity. They bow because they recognize what we are. Or because you destroy them if they don't, Chris muttered behind Jake. Heard him, careful human. We are patient with those who do not understand, but there are limits to our mercy. Jake took a step forward. Let me be clear. Humanity respects strength, we respect wisdom, we respect age and experience, but we will not worship anyone, we will not bow, we will not call anyone master or lord or god. If you want peace with Earth, it will be as equals. If you want war, then we'll fight, but we will never kneel. The chamber erupted in angry voices. The Ascendants spoke in their own language, harsh and musical at the same time. Jake stood his ground while his crew gathered around him. Raised his hand and silence fell. You are either very brave or very foolish, he said. Perhaps both. Very well, we will give you 1 month. Return to your world, speak with your leaders. Explain to them what you have seen here today. Explain the power we possess. Then return and give us your answer. Will humanity submit to divine rule or will you choose destruction? We already know our answer, Jake said. Then your month is for you to accept the inevitable, said. He waved his hand and the docking beam activated again. Go. When you return, you will kneel or you will burn. Jake and his crew were pulled back through the corridors to their ship. Nobody spoke until they were back on the bridge, and the horizon's edge was moving away from the divine throne. Get me a secure line to Earth Command, Jake said. Priority 1. What are you going to tell them? Amy asked. Jake watched the palace of light grow smaller on the truth, that we just met a bunch of bullies with fancy weapons who think they're gods, and that humanity is going to have to teach them otherwise. Chris checked his weapons. They can destroy moons. They can, Jake agreed. But we've faced worse. We've faced ourselves. Compared to the wars humans have fought against each other, these Ascendants are just another enemy. An enemy that bleeds. An enemy that can be beaten. You sound very confident, Amy said. Jake smiled, but there was no humor in it. I'm not confident we'll win, but I'm absolutely sure we're going to fight. Because the one thing humanity learned a long time ago is that freedom is worth dying for. And if we bow to these people, we're not free. Nobody in their empire is free. The ship jumped into faster-than-light travel, leaving the system behind. But Jake knew they would be back. Humanity always came back. And when they did, the Ascendants would learn that no matter how powerful you are, no matter how long you've ruled, there are some people who will never kneel. The message to Earth Command took 6 hours to arrive. Admiral Karen read it 3 times before calling an emergency council meeting. The debate that followed would last for days. But in the end, humanity made the choice it always made when faced with tyrants. They chose to stand. 3 weeks after his first visit, Jake returned to Prime. This time, he came alone on a smaller diplomatic shuttle. Earth Command had made their decision, but they needed more time to prepare. Jake's job was to buy that time by pretending to negotiate. The Ascendants received him in a different chamber, smaller but no less impressive. Sat on his floating throne, but only 3 other Ascendants were present. Elle stood at his right hand, her blue energy crown pulsing with light. You return, Commander said. Does Earth kneel? Earth wants to discuss terms, Jake lied smoothly. But first, we need to understand what submission means. What exactly would you require from us? Leaned back, looking pleased. Finally, wisdom. Very well, we will explain how the divine order functions. For the next hour, Jake listened as El described the tribute system. Every world in the Ascendant Empire paid taxes in resources and labor. Every city had to build a temple where citizens gathered weekly to worship. Every child learned in schools that the Ascendants were gods who had brought civilization to the barbaric galaxy. And if someone refuses to worship, Jake asked, then we remind them why they should, El said coldly. Jake spent 3 more days in negotiations, asking endless questions about trade, governance, and religious requirements. But his real work happened at night, in the shadows between the glowing towers of Prime. Chris had come with him, disguised as a maintenance worker. Together, they moved through the lower levels of the orbital city, the places where servants and slaves lived. These were the 300 species that the Ascendants ruled over. They did not look happy. In a cramped market district, Jake met a being named. He was from a species called the creatures that looked like large birds with 4 arms and eyes that could see in multiple directions. Ran a small shop that sold food to other slaves. "You're human," said when Jake approached. His voice came through a translator device. "I heard the Ascendants met your kind. Are you here to join our chains?" "We're here to understand them first," Jake said carefully. "How long have your people served the Ascendants?" "Served" made a sound like choking laughter. "We were conquered 600 years ago. Before that, we were explorers. We traveled between stars, meeting new species, learning new things. Then the Ascendants came. They said we could worship them as gods or die. Most of us chose to live. And now..." 4 arms gestured at the cramped shop, the dirty streets, the other beings shuffling past with their heads down. "Now we work until we die. We send our children to serve in the temples. We give everything we have and call it tribute. And we tell ourselves it could be worse." "Could it?" Chris asked. "Yes," said quietly. "The people tried to rebel 200 years ago. The Ascendants burned there, 3 billion dead in one day. After that, nobody else tried." Jake bought some food from and left money that was worth far more than the meal. When tried to refuse, Jake pressed it into one of his hands. "For information," he said. "Keep talking to me and there will be more." Over the next few days, Jake met dozens of beings from different species. All of them told similar stories. The Ascendants demanded worship and received it through fear. Children were taken to serve in the temples. Resources were stripped from worlds until they could barely feed their own people, and anyone who questioned the divine order disappeared. Meanwhile, Chris spent his time studying the city's structure. He took readings with devices hidden in his clothes. He mapped energy flows and defensive systems, and he found something interesting. "The whole place runs on ancient generators," Chris told Jake in their quarters. "They're buried deep in the planet's core, tapping into geothermal energy. The power output is incredible, but the technology is old, really old." "How old?" "Thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands, and it doesn't look like anyone has maintained it properly in a long time." Jake filed that information away. It might be useful later. On his 6th night on Prime, Jake saw something that made his blood run cold. He was walking through a residential district when he heard crying. He followed the sound to a courtyard where Ascendant guards were gathering children from various species. "Where are you taking them?" a parent demanded, clutching her child. "The Divine Palace requires new servants," one guard said. He was not Ascendant. He was from a species Jake did not recognize, but he wore the uniform of the Temple Guard. "Your daughter has been selected. It is an honor." "She's only 8 years old." "Old enough to learn service to the divine," the guard said. He pulled the child from her mother's arms. Jake started forward, but Chris grabbed his shoulder. "Don't," Chris whispered urgently. "We can't blow our cover." Jake knew Chris was right, but watching children being taken from their parents was almost more than he could bear. He forced himself to turn away. The next morning, Jake requested a meeting with Elle. She received him in a garden that floated in zero gravity, with plants growing in impossible spirals around them. "I saw children being taken last night," Jake said bluntly, "for temple service." "Yes," Elle said, "it is a great honor for families to have their children serve the divine." They didn't look honored, they looked terrified. Because they do not yet understand. In time, the children will learn. They will grow to love their service. "They'll grow to fear you," Jake said. "There's a difference." Elle turned to face him. For the first time, Jake saw something in her expression that might have been doubt. "You do not understand our ways." "I understand taking children from their parents," Jake said. "We had slavery on Earth once. We fought a war to end it. The people who kept slaves said it was natural, that it was right, that it was even good for the slaves. They were wrong, and so are you." "We are gods," Elle said, but her voice lacked the certainty it had before. "We do what is necessary to maintain order." "Do you really believe that?" Jake asked. "Do you really believe you're gods?" Elle was quiet for a long moment. Around them, the impossible plants swayed in breezes that did not exist. "I have served the divine order for 400 years, she finally said. "In all that time, I have never questioned our nature. To question is to doubt. To doubt is to fall." "Or maybe to doubt is to think," Jake said. "Maybe that's what you're really afraid of. Not humans refusing to kneel, but your own people starting to ask questions." Before Elle could respond, an alarm sounded. Jake's communication device came alive with Amy Parker's urgent voice. "Commander, you need to get back to the shuttle now. Something's happening." Jake ran. Chris appeared from nowhere and ran beside him. They reached the docking bay to find it sealed. Ascendant guards blocked their path. "What's going on?" Jake demanded. "High Ascendant requires your presence," a guard said. "Immediately." They were taken to the throne room at gunpoint. Waited there, and this time he was not calm. Energy crackled around his crown. His eyes burned with anger. "Your people have been spying," said. "We detected scanning equipment. Did you think we would not notice?" "We wanted to understand your technology," Jake said, thinking fast. "Is that a crime?" "It is when the intent is hostile," descended from his throne. "We have been patient with humanity. We have given you time to accept reality, but you waste that time plotting against us." "We haven't plotted anything," Jake said. "We've just been learning." "Learning our weaknesses," Elle said, entering the chamber. "Learning how to attack us." Pointed at Jake. "You have 1 week, 7 of your Earth days. Return to your world. Tell your leaders that the time for negotiation is over. Humanity will kneel or humanity will burn. We will destroy you as we destroyed the. You will serve as an example to the galaxy of what happens to those who defy the divine." "You would kill billions of people," Jake asked quietly. "We would remind billions of people why they should worship," said. "Your pride is not worth their lives." Jake met the Ascendant's black eyes. "You're right about one thing. This is about pride. Your pride. You've spent so long pretending to be gods that you can't admit you're just people with powerful weapons. You're so afraid of looking weak that you'll murder entire worlds. That's not divine. That's just sad." His energy crown flared bright. For a moment, Jake thought the Ascendant would kill him right there, but controlled himself with visible effort. 7 days, he said. Then Earth will kneel or burn." Jake and Chris were escorted back to their shuttle under heavy guard. As they lifted off from Prime, Jake sent a coded message to Admiral Karen on Earth. It was one word: now. "Think we bought them enough time?" Chris asked. Jake looked back at the glowing palace in orbit. "We're about to find out. Because in 7 days, the Ascendants are going to learn that humanity doesn't respond well to threats, especially threats against our home." The shuttle jumped into faster-than-light travel. Behind them, the Ascendants prepared for war. They had no idea what was coming. For 10,000 years, they had been the strongest power in their part of the galaxy. They thought that made them invincible. They were about to learn the difference between power and strength. And they were about to discover what humans do when someone threatens their children and demands they kneel. 7 days. The countdown had begun. Admiral Karen stood on the bridge of the carrier Freedom's Voice and watched her fleet assemble. 23 ships, the largest battle group Earth had sent into deep space. It was not enough to match the Ascendants in raw firepower, but Karen had not built her career by fighting fair. "Status report," she said to Captain Daniel Cross, the ship's commander. "All vessels report ready, Admiral," Daniel said. He was a veteran of the Mars Rebellion, a man who understood that sometimes you had to take risks to win. "Engineering teams have finished installing the countermeasure systems. Lieutenant Barnes says they're ready to deploy." Karen nodded. Barnes was young, barely 25, but she had a gift for understanding alien technology. In the 3 weeks since Jake's first contact with the Ascendants, and her team had worked day and night to find a way to fight back. "And our intelligence?" Karen asked. "Commander's data has been analyzed," Daniel replied. "The Ascendants draw power from ancient generators buried in Prime. If we can disrupt those generators, their weapons will fail." "A big if," Karen said. "Yes, ma'am, but it's the only chance we have." Back on Earth, the debate had raged for days. The Council of Nations met in emergency session to decide humanity's response. Some argued for submission. Why fight beings who could destroy moons? Why risk billions of lives over pride? President Helen had ended the debate with a speech that would be remembered for generations. She stood before the council chamber and spoke in a voice that carried no doubt. "Our ancestors fought against kings who claimed divine right to rule," she said. "They fought against empires that enslaved millions. They fought against dictators who promised order in exchange for freedom. Every time, some people said it was safer to submit. Every time they were wrong, because safety bought with submission is not safety at all. It's just slower death." She paused, looking at each representative. "The Ascendants demand we kneel. They demand we worship them. They demand we send our children to serve in their temples, and if we refuse, they will kill us. But here's what they don't understand. We would rather die free than live as slaves. That's not pride, that's principle, and it's a principle worth fighting for." The vote was not unanimous, but it was clear. Humanity would stand. Now, 6 days after Jake's message arrived, Karen's fleet was ready. They had positioned themselves 3 light years from Prime, close enough to reach quickly but far enough to avoid detection. "Message from Earth Command," the communications officer said. "It's from Commander. He's back at Prime. The Ascendants have given him their final ultimatum." Karen read the message. Jake had returned alone, one last attempt at diplomacy. The Ascendants had not changed their position. Kneel or die. Earth had one more day to decide. "Send the order to all ships," Karen said. "We jump in 12 hours. Tell them to get some rest. Tomorrow we're going to war with gods." On Prime, Jake stood before and the assembled Ascendants. This time, the throne room was crowded with warriors in gleaming armor, their weapons humming with contained energy. They expected Earth's surrender. "You return with your answer?" asked. "I return with Earth's answer," Jake said. He kept his voice steady, his posture straight. "We will not kneel. We will not worship. We will not send our children to your temples. If you want to destroy Earth, then try. But know that we will fight you with everything we have." The throne room erupted in angry voices. Ascendant warriors moved forward, but raised his hand to stop them. "You doom your entire species," said. His voice was sad rather than angry. "We gave you every chance to see reason." "Reason?" Jake said. "You call slavery reason. You call forced worship reason. That's not reason. That's tyranny dressed up in holy robes." El stepped forward. The divine order has stood for 10,000 years. It will stand for 10,000 more. Your rebellion will be a footnote in history, a warning to others of what happens to those who challenge the divine. Maybe, Jake said, or maybe we'll be the ones writing the history, the ones who remind everyone that there are no gods, just bullies with big weapons. Rose from his throne, energy gathered around him, making the air crackle and shimmer. We are done talking. You have made your choice. Tomorrow, when your sun rises, our fleet will move on Earth. Your world will burn, your cities will fall, and the survivors will learn to kneel in the ashes of everything they loved. Then I guess we'll see you tomorrow, Jake said. He turned and walked toward the exit. You do not fear death, El called after him. Jake stopped and looked back. Everyone fears death, but I fear slavery more, and I'd rather die fighting than live on my knees. He left the throne room and returned to his shuttle. Once aboard, he sent a coded message to Karen. They're coming for Earth tomorrow. They have no idea you're coming for them. That night, Jake could not sleep. He kept thinking about the children he had seen taken from their parents. He thought about and the people, trapped in slavery for 600 years. He thought about the 3 billion who died when they tried to be free. And he thought about Earth, his home, where his sister lived with her 2 children, where billions of people went about their lives, not knowing that tomorrow, aliens who called themselves gods planned to murder them all. Jake's hands clenched into fists. The Ascendants thought they were invincible. They thought 10,000 years of rule meant they would rule forever. They were wrong. Across the Empire, in secret meetings and hidden places, and others like him prepared, Jake had given them a message. When the humans fight, rise up, all of you together. Show these false gods that their slaves remember how to be free. Had spread the word. 300 species, living under the boot of the Ascendants for thousands of years. They would strike at the same moment. They would target communications, supplies, command centers. They would remind the Ascendants that empires built on fear can crumble in a day. On the Freedom's Voice, Karen briefed her captains one final time. We can't match their firepower ship to ship, she said. But we don't need to. Lieutenant Barnes has created a weapon that targets their power source. It won't destroy their generators, but it will overload them temporarily. When their weapons fail, we strike hard and fast. What if it doesn't work? One captain asked. Then we improvise, Karen said. We adapt. We find another way. That's what humans do. We survive. And if we lose? Another captain asked quietly. Karen looked around the room at these brave men and women who were willing to fly into battle against impossible odds. Then we make sure our sacrifice means something. We make sure the Ascendants remember that humanity refused to kneel. We make sure every enslaved species in this empire knows that someone fought back. Maybe we inspire the next rebellion. Maybe we plant the seed that grows into freedom for others. She stood. But I don't plan to lose. I plan to win. I plan to go home and tell my that I was there the day humanity taught the universe that power doesn't make you a god. It just makes you a target. The captains returned to their ships. Engineers made final checks on weapons and shields. Pilots reviewed attack patterns. Soldiers checked their gear. Everyone knew that many of them would not survive the next day, but they were ready. In his quarters, Jake wrote a message to his sister. He told her he loved her. He told her to take care of her kids. He told her that whatever happened, she should remember that some things are worth fighting for. He set the message to send automatically if he did not return. Then he lay down and tried to rest. Tomorrow would be the longest day of his life. Tomorrow, the Ascendants would learn that humanity's greatest weapon was not technology or strength. It was the absolute refusal to accept tyranny. Tomorrow, gods would kneel. Karen stood alone on the observation deck, watching stars drift past. She had fought many battles in her life. She had won most of them, but this was different. This was not about territory or resources or politics. This was about freedom itself. She thought about the admiral who had trained her, an old man named who had fought in Earth's last great war. He had told her once that the hardest part of command was sending good people to die. But, he had said, sometimes death in a good cause is better than life in a bad one. The trick is making sure the cause is actually good. Karen looked at her reflection in the viewport. This is a good cause, she said quietly. This is the right fight. The ship's clock counted down the hours. At dawn, the battle would begin. At dawn, the ascendants would come for Earth, expecting an easy conquest. Instead, they would find humanity waiting. And behind humanity, an empire of slaves ready to rise. And in the chaos and confusion, perhaps freedom would find a way. Karen returned to the bridge. Signal all ships, she said. Prepare to jump, and someone tell Commander to get clear. This is going to get messy. The fleet powered up their engines. Weapons charged. Shields activated. 23 human ships against an empire that had stood for 10,000 years. The odds were terrible. The risk was enormous. But humanity had never been good at accepting impossible odds. They had a bad habit of doing impossible things. In 6 hours, they would find out if this was one of those times. In 6 hours, the universe would learn that some species refuse to kneel, no matter how many guns are pointed at them. In 6 hours, war would come to prime. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. 23 ships materialized against the backdrop of binary stars. On every vessel, alarms wailed as crews scrambled to battle stations. Enemy contacts, the sensor officer reported on the Freedom's voice. Counting 47 ascendant warships, they're moving to intercept. Admiral Karen studied the tactical display. The Ascendants had not expected them here. They had sent their fleet toward Earth, leaving only garrison forces at Prime. But those garrison forces were still deadly. Launch all fighters, Karen ordered. All ships, defensive formation pattern Delta, stay tight and watch for their energy weapons. Captain Daniel Cross relayed the orders. Across the fleet, small fighter craft poured from carrier bays like angry hornets. Human pilots, some barely old enough to vote, flew toward an enemy that could destroy planets. The Ascendants fired first. Beams of pure energy, bright enough to blind, lanced through space. The lead human destroyer took a direct hit. Its shields flared and collapsed. The ship's hull cracked open, spilling atmosphere and debris. Echo down, the communications officer said quietly. No survivors. Karen felt the familiar weight of command settle on her shoulders. Good people had just died under her orders. More would follow. Continue the advance, she said. Barnes, activate the countermeasures. Deep in the Freedom's Voices engineering section, Lieutenant Barnes worked at a console surrounded by equipment that hummed and sparked. Her hands moved across controls with practiced speed. Activating now, she said. A pulse of energy radiated from the human fleet. It was not a weapon in any traditional sense. It was a carefully tuned frequency designed to interfere with the ancient generators that powered Prime. Had based it on Commander's sensor readings and 3 weeks of desperate calculations. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ascendant weapons flickered. Ships that had been firing steadily went dark for 3 seconds. When their weapons came back online, they were weaker, unstable. It's working, Daniel said. Their power output is down by 40%. Press the attack, Karen ordered. All ships full offensive spread. Target their heavy cruisers. The human fleet surged forward. Missiles flew in clouds of white smoke. Rail guns fired slugs of metal at impossible speeds. Laser batteries carved through ascendant shields. The battle turned into a close-range brawl where human determination matched alien technology. On Prime, the lights flickered. Stood in his throne room, watching the battle on. Around him, ascendant commanders shouted orders and argued about tactics. How are they doing this? One demanded. Our weapons should cut through their shields like air. They're disrupting the generators, Elle said, her face pale. Somehow they found a way to weaken our power source. His hands gripped his throne. For 10,000 years, the Ascendants had been invincible. Now, humans barely 3 centuries into space travel were matching them ship for ship. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. It was happening. Send more ships, said. Pull them from the border sectors. I want these humans destroyed. But reinforcements would take time. And in the chaos of battle, something else was happening. Something the Ascendants had not anticipated. Across their empire, the subject species rose up, and his fellow attacked the temple guards on there. On a dozen other planets, similar revolts began. Slaves became rebels. Servants became saboteurs. The careful order of 10,000 years began to crack. On Prime itself, Jake moved through the lower levels with Chris and a small team of human marines. They had stayed behind when the fleet, hiding in the slave quarters. Now, while the Ascendants were distracted by the space battle, they moved toward their objective. How much farther? Jake asked. 2 more levels, Chris said, checking a handheld scanner. The generator complex should be right below us. They moved through corridors that shook with each explosion from the battle above. Emergency lighting cast everything in red. They encountered no guards. Every Ascendant warrior was either in space or manning defensive positions. They reached a massive door that glowed with energy. Chris placed charges around the frame while Jake kept watch. A group of workers appeared carrying supplies. They stopped, staring at the humans. Go, Jake told them. Get to safety. The Ascendant's time is ending. The scattered. Jake hoped they would spread the word. Hoped they would tell others that humans were striking at the heart of the Ascendant power. The charges exploded, and the door fell inward. Beyond lay a chamber that took Jake's breath away. The generator complex was enormous, a cathedral of machinery that stretched down into the planet's core. Massive conduits carried energy upward, feeding the orbital city and the Ascendant fleet. This is it, Barnes said through their communication link. She was watching from the Freedom's voice. If you can overload those primary nodes, the whole system will cascade. The Ascendants will lose power for hours, maybe days. Will it explode? Jake asked. There was a pause. Yes, admitted. Probably. You'll have about 5 minutes to get clear. Jake looked at Chris. His security officer nodded. They both knew they might not make it out, but if they succeeded, they would give humanity a chance. Do it, Jake said. They moved into the generator complex. The heat was incredible. The sound was deafening. Ancient machines built by long-dead civilizations hummed and roared. Jake and Chris placed explosive charges on the primary nodes, moving quickly despite the choking temperature. Above them in space, the battle raged. More human ships died. The destroyer Valiant broke apart under concentrated fire. The frigate Soul disappeared in a ball of flame. But the humans kept fighting, kept pushing forward. And slowly, incredibly, they were winning. The Ascendants, weakened by the power disruption, could not maintain their defensive positions. Human ships broke through their lines and began targeting the orbital platforms around Prime. All charges set, Chris reported. We're ready. Jake was about to give the order when appeared. The High Ascendant dropped from above, his energy crown blazing so bright it hurt to look at. He landed between Jake and the exit, blocking their escape. You said, his voice shook with rage. You did this. You brought chaos to our perfect order. Your order was built on slavery, Jake said. He kept his hand near his weapon, though he knew it would be useless against an Ascendant. It deserved to fall. We brought peace to the galaxy, said. We ended wars. We united species under one rule. You conquered them, Jake said. You took away their freedom and called it peace. That's not peace, that's just control. Energy crackled around his hands. You speak of freedom as if it's valuable, but freedom is chaos. Freedom is war. Freedom is species destroying each other. We save them from themselves. By making them slaves, Jake shook his head. That's not saving them, that's just making yourself feel important. Attacked, energy blasts tore through the chamber, melting metal and shattering stone. Jake and Chris dove for cover. Chris returned fire with his rifle, but the bullets vaporized before reaching the ascendant. You cannot win, said. He moved closer, his power growing with each step. You are mortal, we are divine, we are eternal. You're not divine, Jake said. He pulled himself up behind a generator housing. You're just old and scared. Scared that if people stop believing you're gods, you'll have to face what you really are. Tyrants, murderers, slavers. Silence. His blast destroyed Jake's cover. Jake rolled away, but the heat singed his uniform. Then Elle appeared. She descended from the same entrance had used, but she did not attack. She stood between Jake and the high ascendant. Elle, stand aside, commanded. No, she said quietly. The word fell like a stone into water, creating ripples that spread outward. Stared at his most loyal priestess. What did you say? I said no, Elle repeated. She turned to face him. I have served you for 400 years. I have enforced your will across 100 worlds. I have never questioned, but the human is right. We are not gods, we never were. You dare speak heresy, crown flared bright. You dare doubt. I dare to think, Elle said. Something we stopped doing a long time ago. We found power and convinced ourselves it made us special. But power is just power. It doesn't make us better. It doesn't make us right. It just makes us dangerous. Then you are a traitor, said. He raised his hands, energy gathering for a killing blow. Maybe, Elle said, or maybe I'm finally being honest. She did not fight back when struck her. The energy hit her chest and she fell. Jake started toward her, but Chris grabbed him. The charges, Chris said urgently. We have to detonate now. Jake looked at Elle lying on the ground. He looked at, standing over her like a wrathful god from ancient myths, and he made his choice. Go, Jake told Chris. Get out, I'll set off the charges. Sir, you won't make it. I know, Jake said. That's why you're going. Someone has to tell them what happened here. Someone has to tell them we won. Chris hesitated, torn between duty and friendship. Then he ran, heading for the exit. Jake moved to the detonator, saw him and fired, but Jake was already diving. The blast missed by inches. Jake hit the ground, rolled, and slammed his fist down on the trigger. The generator screamed. Energy surged through the ancient systems, overloading circuits that had run for thousands of years. Explosions rippled through the chamber. What have you done? Shouted. I've given freedom a chance, Jake said. The chamber shook. Cracks appeared in the walls. Power conduits burst, spraying molten metal. Above them, throughout Prime, lights went dark. The orbital city began to drift, its artificial gravity failing. Ran for the exit, not to escape, but to try to stop the cascade failure. He reached the primary control panel and poured his own energy into it, trying to stabilize the systems. For a moment it looked like it might work. His power, channeled through the generators, slowed the overload. But then more explosions rocked the chamber. The ancient technology, pushed beyond its limits, finally failed. Fell to his knees, his energy crown flickering. He looked smaller somehow, less impressive, just a being who had lived too long and believed his own lies. Jake pulled himself toward where Elle lay. She was still alive, barely. Her eyes found his. Did we win? She whispered. Jake heard the sounds of the chamber collapsing around them, heard the generators dying, heard the end of an empire built on fear. Yes, he said, we won. She smiled, then her eyes closed. Jake tried to reach the exit, but debris blocked his path. He was trapped. The chamber filled with heat and smoke. He thought about Earth, about his sister's children who would grow up free because of what happened here today. Then strong hands grabbed him. Chris had come back, pulling him toward a side passage that Jake had not seen. They ran together as the world fell apart behind them. They made it out with seconds to spare. Behind them, the generator complex exploded in a chain reaction that shook the entire planet. The orbital city went dark. Every light, every screen, every glowing surface died. Prime, jewel of the Ascendant Empire, became just another piece of metal floating in space. In the battle above, Ascendant warships suddenly lost power. Their weapons went silent. Their shields collapsed. Some ships drifted dead in space. Others activated emergency systems and limped away from the fight. Admiral Karen watched from the bridge of the Freedom's Voice. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. The impossible had happened. The Ascendants, who had ruled for 10,000 years, were helpless. "All ships cease fire," she ordered, "but stay alert, keep weapons charged." Captain Daniel Cross looked at her. "Are we accepting their surrender?" "If they offer it," Karen said. "I'm not interested in revenge, just victory." A communication signal came through. It was weak, distorted, but the translation was clear. An Ascendant commander requested terms. Karen spoke carefully. "This is Admiral Karen of Earth. We will accept your surrender under the following conditions. Release all slaves. Dismantle all weapons platforms. Allow inspection of all worlds in your empire. And acknowledge that you are not gods, just people who had power and misused it." There was a long pause. Then the Ascendant commander agreed. On Prime, Jake and Chris climbed through wreckage toward the surface. The explosion had collapsed entire sections of the underground complex. They had to squeeze through gaps and climb over debris. Several times, they had to stop and clear a path. "Commander, this is Freedom's Voice," a voice crackled through Jake's damaged communicator. "Sir, are you alive?" "Barely," Jake said, "but I'm here, status report." "The Ascendants have surrendered, sir, all of them. Their power grid is down across the entire empire. We won." Jake stopped climbing. He had prepared himself for death. He had accepted that this mission would be his last, but somehow, impossibly, he was still alive, and they had won. "Roger that," Freedom's Voice. "Tell Admiral we'll need an extraction, and medical teams, lots of medical teams." They reached the surface to find chaos. Prime was on emergency power, barely enough to maintain life support. Ascendants and their servants moved through darkened corridors, confused and frightened. The perfect order had collapsed. Jake and Chris were picked up by a human shuttle an hour later. As they lifted off from the planet, Jake looked down at the orbital city. It looked so much smaller now, so much less impressive without all the light and energy. Just buildings floating in space. The shuttle brought them to the Freedom's Voice. Admiral met them in the medical bay while doctors treated their burns and injuries. "You crazy fool," Karen said, but she was smiling. "You could have died down there." "I know," Jake said, "but someone had to do it." "Well, because of you and your crew, we've got an empire surrendering to us. Every slave species is celebrating. The Ascendants are asking for mercy." Karen sat down next to his medical bed. "Now comes the hard part, figuring out what to do next." Over the next few days, the scope of their victory became clear. The Ascendants, without their power generators, could not maintain control. Their fleet scattered. Their administrators fled. And across 300 worlds, people who had been slaves for centuries tasted freedom for the first time. Survived the generator explosion. He was pulled from the wreckage by rescue teams, his body broken but alive. They brought him aboard the Freedom's Voice and placed him in a medical cell. Karen went to see him. The High Ascendant looked nothing like a god now. He wore simple clothes. His energy crown was gone. His hair was white, his skin gray. He looked like what he was, a very old being who had lived too long. "Why didn't you kill me?" he asked when Karen entered. "Because we're not you," Karen said simply. "We don't execute prisoners. We don't destroy cities as examples. We fight when we have to, but we don't enjoy it." "We brought order to the galaxy," said, but his voice was weak, uncertain. "For 10,000 years we maintained peace." You maintained control, Karen corrected. There's a difference. Peace that comes from fear isn't real peace. It's just the absence of rebellion, until someone decides to rebel anyway. Looked away. What will happen to my people? That's up to them, Karen said, and up to the species they enslaved. We're organizing a council. Every species gets a vote. They'll decide together what justice looks like. They will want revenge. Maybe, Karen admitted. Or maybe they'll want something better, a chance to build something new, a real peace based on cooperation instead of conquest. She turned to leave, then stopped. You know what the sad thing is? Your people could have been great. You had all this technology, all this knowledge. You could have used it to help others, to explore, to learn. Instead, you used it to make yourself feel powerful. What a waste. Did not answer. Karen left him sitting in his cell, contemplating the ruins of his empire. Jake spent 2 weeks recovering from his injuries. When he was well enough to travel, he returned to Prime. But this time, he came as a friend, not an enemy. The orbital city was slowly coming back to life. The human engineers, led by Barnes, were helping to restore power. But they were making changes. The new system would not be centralized. Every section would have its own generators, its own control. No one would ever again have the kind of absolute power the Ascendants had wielded. Jake found in the market district. The merchant looked different. He stood, smiled more. Freedom suited him. Commander said, his 4 arms spreading in a gesture of welcome. You returned. I had to see how you were doing, Jake said. We are learning to be free again, said. It is not easy. We have forgotten how to make our own choices, but we are learning. They walked together through the market. Beings from dozens of species moved around them, talking, trading, laughing. It was the sound of life returning to normal, or something close to normal. What will your people do now? Jake asked. Some will return to ours, said. We have not seen our planet in 600 years. Others will stay here. And some, like me, will do what they did before the Ascendants came. We will explore. We will travel between stars. We will be free. Jake smiled. That sounds good. What about you, Commander? What will humans do? Jake looked up at the stars visible through the transparent dome. We'll go home, we'll rebuild, and we'll help if anyone wants our help, but we won't rule. We learned a long time ago that power corrupts. Better to share it than hoard it. 3 months after the battle, representatives from all 300 former slave species gathered on Prime for a council. The Ascendants were there too, but not on thrones. They sat in the same simple chairs as everyone else. No crowns, no energy auras, no claims of divinity. Karen addressed the council. We're here to decide the future. Earth has no interest in ruling you. We fought to free you, not to replace one master with another. But we need to establish some basic principles, rules that everyone agrees to follow. The debate lasted for weeks. Some species wanted the Ascendants punished harshly. Others argued for mercy. Jake spoke on behalf of those who had died. He told them about the children taken from their parents, about the billions killed when they rebelled, about the centuries of slavery and fear. But he also told them that revenge would not bring those people back. The Ascendants committed terrible crimes, he said. But if we respond with more violence, more death, we become like them. We have a chance to do something different, to show that justice doesn't require cruelty, that strength doesn't require domination. In the end, they reached a compromise. The Ascendants would give up all weapons. They would share their technology freely. They would work to rebuild the worlds they had damaged, and they would never again claim to be divine. Some Ascendants, accepted this fate quietly. Others struggled with their loss of power. A few even tried to restart their old empire, but they found no followers. The subject species had tasted freedom and refused to give it up. A new alliance formed, based on cooperation rather than conquest. Species that had been enemies under Ascendant rule learned to work together. Trade routes opened. Cultural exchanges began. The galaxy slowly healed. Jake stood with Amy Parker on the observation deck of the Horizon's Edge as they prepared to return to Earth. Behind them, Prime glowed with new light, not the artificial divine radiance of before, but the warm light of homes and businesses and life going on. "We did something good here," Amy said. "We did something necessary," Jake corrected. "The good part is what happens next, whether they can build something better." "Do you think they will?" Jake thought about planning to explore again, about the council working through disagreements with votes instead of violence, about ascendant engineers teaching their technology to the species they had once enslaved. "I think they have a chance," he said. "That's all anyone can ask for, a chance to be better." The Horizon's Edge jumped to faster-than-light travel, heading home. Jake had spent months in the system, fighting and negotiating and rebuilding. He was ready to see Earth again, to hug his sister and meet her children who had been born while he was away. But he knew he would return. Humanity had made friends in this part of the galaxy, friends who would need help sometimes, friends who would offer help in return. The age of gods was over. The age of equals had begun. On Prime looked out at the stars from a simple apartment in the lower levels. He had no crown, no throne, no power. He was just another citizen, subject to the same laws as everyone else. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered if he had ever really believed he was a god, or if he had just told the lie so many times that it became easier than the truth. The truth that he was just a being who found a powerful tool and used it to hurt others. He thought about Jake, the human who refused to kneel, who had looked at godlike power and seen only tyranny, who had risked everything to free people he did not even know. That was what real strength looked like, realized. Not the ability to destroy, but the courage to stand up to those who would. Not the power to rule, but the wisdom to refuse that power. He would never be that strong, but perhaps he could learn. Perhaps in whatever time he had left, he could teach his people to be better than they had been. It was not redemption. Nothing could redeem 10,000 years of slavery and murder, but it was a start, a small step toward becoming people instead of pretending to be gods. Above him, in the darkness of space, human ships patrolled the borders of the new alliance, not as conquerors but as guardians, ready to stand up to the next tyrant, the next bully, the next being who claimed divine right to rule others. Because humanity had learned the hardest lesson of all: freedom is not given, it is taken, and once taken it must be defended, not just for yourself but for everyone who cannot defend themselves. They called themselves gods, the Ascendants. They thought their power made them divine. They thought their technology made them invincible. They thought 10,000 years of rule meant they would rule forever. They were wrong, because in the end they met a species that refused to bow, a species that believed all beings were equal, regardless of power or technology or age, a species that would rather die free than live as slaves. They called themselves gods until humans made them kneel. And in kneeling they learned to stand again, not as masters but as equals, not as gods but as people. It was the best lesson they had ever learned, even if it took a war to teach them.